A drunk tourist yelled at a royal guard, thinking he could get away with anything. But the guard's reaction shocked everyone. Let's start from the beginning. The square in front of Buckingham Palace basked in bright sunshine. Golden rays danced across the ornate gates, shimmering on their intricate designs, as if emphasizing their grandeur. Tourists from around the globe filled the area, creating a symphony of footsteps, camera clicks, and accents blending into a lively hum. It was just another day for James Carter, a 28-year-old royal guard. James stood on duty, as motionless as a marble statue. His fair skin had a slight pink hue from the crisp morning air, but his face remained stern, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Dressed in a red tunic with gold buttons, black trousers with a thin red stripe, polished boots, and a towering bearskin hat, James was a living symbol of the British monarchy. For him, every day on duty was an honor. His uniform was more than just clothing. It was a testament to discipline, pride, and tradition. But James's sense of duty wasn't exactly on the minds of the crowd. Groups of tourists darted around, snapping selfies and occasionally mimicking his pose, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. Amid this bustling scene, one man stood out, a tall figure in an orange jacket. The man, around 50 years old, had a face flushed from alcohol that was visible even from a distance. Draped over his shoulders was an American flag, as if declaring to everyone, "I'm the main character here." He held a cup of beer in one hand, the liquid inside swaying precariously with every exaggerated motion. His loud, mocking voice easily overpowered the general buzz of the crowd. "Hey you! The robot in red!" he shouted, waving the beer cup. "Do you even breathe?" The crowd perked up instantly. People turned to look. Some laughed, while others instinctively pulled out their phones, sensing a scene worth recording. The man soaked in the attention, taking a few steps closer to the white line that served as an invisible boundary between the guard and the tourists. "Look at him! He doesn't even blink!" the man continued, turning to address the onlookers. "What's the matter, buddy? Battery's dead?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, though a few faces started showing disapproval. A young woman with a child glanced at the man and whispered to her companion, "That's so disrespectful. How can he act like that?" James, of course, didn't react. His gaze remained fixed in the distance, and his posture was millimeter perfect. He stood so still it seemed as though time itself avoided touching him. But the man wasn't deterred by the silence. Instead, it emboldened him. He took another step toward the line and waved his beer cup more dramatically, raising his voice further. "Hey, everyone! Want to see me make him move?" The crowd collectively held its breath. Some chuckled nervously. Others murmured, "He wouldn't dare." "You're here for us!" the man shouted, almost as if addressing James directly. "Isn't that what the Royal Guard's for? To entertain the tourists? Or are you just a mannequin?" James remained unmoving, seemingly oblivious to the taunts. Yet his presence was palpable, as solid and imposing as the bearskin hat on his head. The crowd began to split into two camps. Some found the situation amusing, while others were visibly uncomfortable. A woman in a bright green jacket turned to the man beside her and said, "He's just doing his job. That guy is being awful." But the man in the orange jacket didn't care. He thrived on the attention, and his drunken confidence told him he could do whatever he pleased. "What's the matter, buddy? Not gonna answer me?" he yelled again, raising his beer cup. "Or do you need the Queen's permission to speak?" The laughter in the crowd grew fainter as tension thickened. Even those filming started lowering their cameras slightly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The man pretended to pour his beer near the line, his smirk growing even wider. He stared at James with a challenging look, as though daring him to break. James didn't flinch. He didn't move a single inch. Only he knew what was going through his mind, but outwardly he was a picture of stone-cold composure. The crowd fell silent. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Her voice carried farther than she likely intended, but Bob didn't even turn around. He was far too absorbed in his performance. "Work?" he drawled mockingly, tilting his head slightly toward her. "Standing around like a mannequin all day? You've got to be kidding me." His words rang out loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. This time, not everyone laughed. Some began whispering among themselves, while others simply stood in silence, their expressions growing more disapproving. Bob, of course, noticed none of this. In his mind, the world revolved entirely around him. He took another step closer to the line, lowering his cup as if threatening to spill its contents on the ground. "Well, robot, are you gonna move?" he taunted, leaning forward slightly. "Or are you under warranty to stay silent?" James remained completely still, as though carved from stone. Not even the slightest breeze could disturb his unyielding stance. Yet, internally, he was well aware that the situation was nearing its breaking point. The crowd's attitude began to shift. Disapproving glances, once scattered, became more pronounced. A man with a camera quietly muttered to his companion, "What a jerk. I don't even feel like filming this anymore." But Bob remained deaf to anything that didn't fuel his ego. His support was dwindling, yet he clung to his drunken confidence. "You think you're better than everyone else?" Bob suddenly bellowed, his voice rising into a shout. "Just standing there like a statue." He stepped back half a pace, lifting his cup dramatically above his head. His voice echoed across the square. "I'm a tourist," he proclaimed as though it were a title of honor. "I pay money. We pay for you. For your hats, for your boots." The crowd fell silent. Even those who had been recording the spectacle lowered their phones. Bob's words hung heavy in the air, as if challenging not just the guard, but everything he represented. Then, in that moment, James, who had remained absolutely motionless until now, suddenly turned his head. The movement was so sharp and unexpected that the crowd collectively gasped. His cold, focused gaze locked directly onto Bob. "Sir, step back," James commanded in a loud, clear voice. The words cut through the air like thunder on a sunny day. The crowd, which had been murmuring and whispering, fell completely silent. It was the first time anyone had heard James speak. "This is your final warning," he added, his posture unchanged. His voice was calm, yet carried such authority that even those standing farther away froze in place. Bob's face flickered with momentary confusion, as though he hadn't anticipated this response. But he quickly masked it with a cocky smirk. "Oh, so he talks," Bob declared loudly, trying to recover his composure. "What are you gonna do now? Just keep threatening me?" Tension filled the air like a tightly wound string about to snap. The crowd remained silent, as though afraid to disrupt the taut stillness. People's eyes darted between James and Bob, bracing for what might happen next. Even the smallest sounds, the rustling of leaves, the click of a phone camera, felt amplified. It was as if the entire square held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Bob seemed to relish every moment. He stepped right up to the white line marking the boundary between tourists and the guard, stopping just short of crossing it. It was as though he was playing a game, taunting but not quite violating the rules. This invisible barrier mirrored his behavior, brazen, provocative, but just shy of outright defiance. Bob stared directly at James, testing how much more the guard could endure. A smug grin spread across his face as the beer cup in his hand swayed back and forth, wafting the sharp scent of alcohol into the air. "You hear me, buddy?" he shouted, waving the cup as if it were a weapon. "Or do you need the Queen's permission to do anything at all?" The crowd froze. A few people chuckled nervously, but the laughter quickly died down. Tourists exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to react. Bob, however, seemed oblivious to the growing awkwardness. A woman standing off to the side with her child couldn't stay silent any longer. "This is disgraceful. Show some respect for their work," she called out. The crowd gasped. The moment James, the royal guard, broke his silence was like a clap of thunder on a clear day. The firm, commanding sound of his voice shattered the tense atmosphere, drawing even the most indifferent onlookers to attention. It was one of those rare occasions when a silent figure came to life, and everyone in the crowd felt the gravity of the moment. Bob, as if stumbling over the weight of James's words, faltered for a brief second. The smug expression on his face wavered, but only for a heartbeat. His drunken stubbornness quickly took over, and feeling exposed under the weight of everyone's gaze, he doubled down on his antics. "Oh, so you can talk, huh?" he shouted, trying to drown out the murmuring crowd that was now buzzing with whispers. "Well, since you're speaking, why don't you tell me? Who are you to tell me what to do?" His voice trembled, despite his best attempts to sound confident. It came across as more of a desperate attempt to regain control, a grip slipping like sand through his fingers. The crowd reacted immediately. Some began shouting, "Get him out of here! He's crossed the line!" Others loudly voiced their displeasure. "This is too much!" Yet Bob seemed oblivious to the growing wave of disapproval. Clutching his beer cup tighter, he stepped back slightly, making a show of himself to draw more attention. "I'm a tourist," he yelled, drawing out the word as if it were a badge of entitlement. "I pay taxes. I'm paying for all of this. Your little show. I demand respect." The crowd's reaction was sharp. People exchanged exasperated glances. Some rolled their eyes, while others shook their heads in disapproval. "This isn't respect. It's disgraceful," a woman shouted from the back. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants just because he's here spending money," someone else added. But Bob remained locked in his self-centered performance. His movements grew more erratic, his drunken aggression morphing into a loud, theatrical display. Swinging his arm dramatically, he smirked and spat out his next line. "So, robot, what are you going to do now? Hit me? Or just keep threatening me?" And then it happened. James took a step forward. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that the crowd audibly gasped. Even Bob stopped smirking for a second, his drunken bravado briefly overshadowed by surprise. Now standing just in front of Bob, James loomed over him, his bright red tunic, polished boots, and towering bearskin hat adding to his commanding presence. He looked every inch a guardian of tradition, his unshakable composure a stark contrast to Bob's chaotic antics. James locked eyes with Bob, his cold, focused gaze cutting through the man's flimsy facade. When he spoke, his voice was steady and laced with unshakable authority. "You are disgracing yourself. Put down the beer and step back immediately." The words struck like a hammer. Simple but powerful, they made Bob's previous attempts at bravado seem pitiful. The crowd erupted into applause. What had moments ago been an audience watching a spectacle now became a united front cheering for James. "Well done! That's how you handle it," someone shouted. "Finally!" added a man with a camera who had been recording everything from the start. Bob stood frozen. The drunken confidence that had fueled his antics evaporated, leaving behind a faint trace of confusion and shame. His expression faltered as he tried to muster a response, but all that came out was an awkward laugh. "Ha ha! Well," he stammered, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. James didn't move. His posture was as rigid as ever, his cold, unwavering gaze fixed on Bob. His entire presence conveyed an unspoken message. "You know you've lost." The crowd was fully behind James now. Applause filled the air as people called out words of encouragement and admiration. "That's professionalism," someone declared. "He's a true soldier," a woman said, her voice filled with respect. Bob, meanwhile, looked as though he had nowhere left to turn. His bravado had crumbled, leaving only faint traces of fear and embarrassment, which he tried desperately to hide. But it was clear to everyone, including Bob himself, that he was no longer in control. The air was thick with tension, and everyone in the square could feel it. This confrontation had reached its tipping point. James's words resonate. James's words, spoken with absolute confidence, echoed in the minds of the crowd. The moment shattered all expectations. Those who had laughed minutes ago now stared at Bob, whose smug demeanor had finally cracked. Yet, instead of admitting his behavior was out of line, Bob made a last-ditch effort to regain control. "Hey, I was just joking!" he yelled, raising his beer cup as if it were some kind of justification. "It's all just a show, right? You're all here to have fun, aren't you?" But the words fell flat. No one laughed. Even the people who had been filming him with their phones now looked at him in disbelief. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, and the mood shifted noticeably. "Enough! This isn't funny anymore," shouted a man in glasses from the back. "This isn't a show. It's their job." A woman with a camera chimed in. The crowd's reaction was like a cold splash of water for Bob. He glanced nervously around, expecting to find support, but instead met only disapproving stares. His grin tightened, looking more like the forced smile of someone who had just realized they'd gone too far. Meanwhile, 2 security guards began making their way through the crowd. Dressed in sharp black suits, they moved with purpose, their expressions deadly serious. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path for them. Bob spotted the guards approaching and visibly tensed. He stumbled a step back, as if trying to escape the inevitable. "Come on, guys, it's just a joke," he said, attempting an unconvincing smile. "Can't you take a little humor?" One of the guards, a tall man with thick eyebrows and a calm, steady demeanor, stopped just a step away from Bob. His voice was firm but measured. "Sir, you are disturbing the peace. We need you to leave the premises." There was no threat in the guard's tone, but the authority in his voice left no room for argument. Bob froze for a moment, caught off guard. The crowd stirred again, and someone called out sarcastically, "That's what happens when you think you can do whatever you want." Applause rippled through the crowd as people supported the guard's actions. Bob, now visibly rattled, tried to backtrack. All right. No need to make a big deal out of this. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just having a little fun." "Your behavior is unacceptable," the guard repeated calmly, stepping closer. Within a second, the guard placed a firm but non-aggressive hand on Bob's shoulder. The second guard took hold of Bob's arm, and the move completely drained the last of his confidence. Okay, I'll leave," Bob stammered, his voice sounding more pathetic by the second. But the crowd had already moved on from him. Their focus shifted to James. Applause and cheers erupted, aimed at the unflinching guard who had stood his ground. "Well done, guard!" someone shouted. "That's real discipline," added a man with a camera. Meanwhile, the guards began escorting Bob away. He continued muttering excuses, trying in vain to reclaim some dignity. "This is just a misunderstanding. Hey, I didn't mean anything by it." But no one was listening. The guards guided him steadily through the crowd, their serious expressions leaving no doubt. Bob's time at the square was over. James, who had maintained his perfect composure throughout the ordeal, didn't even glance in Bob's direction. Standing tall at his post, he remained as steady as ever, his gaze focused ahead, his posture the epitome of professionalism. The crowd erupted into even louder applause as Bob disappeared from sight. Cheers rang out. "That was amazing! A true hero! Way to go, guard! This is going viral for sure." A young man with a phone shouted enthusiastically, "This video's gonna hit 1 million views. I guarantee it." James, unfazed by the noise around him, adjusted his bearskin hat slightly and resumed his usual stance. His face was calm, almost serene, as if nothing had happened. The crowd, still buzzing with excitement, began to disperse. People shared their impressions, rewatched the videos they had captured, and occasionally glanced back at James with admiration. His stoicism and professionalism had left a lasting impression, showing everyone what it meant to maintain dignity in the face of chaos. But James sought neither applause nor recognition. He was simply doing his job, and that made him all the more deserving of respect. When Bob finally disappeared, as Bob vanished behind the security guards, the square in front of Buckingham Palace erupted with a new sound, a hum of admiration and approval. People who had been mere spectators to an unusual spectacle just moments ago now felt united, expressing respect and support for the steadfast royal guard. James, without changing his expression or posture, calmly adjusted his bearskin hat. The movement had a ritualistic quality, like placing a final period on the incident. Once again, his figure became motionless, as if carved from stone. His back was straight, his gaze steady, and his hands rested perfectly at his sides. To anyone just arriving, it would seem as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But the crowd remembered. People continued to murmur, discussing the events that had just unfolded before their eyes, marveling at the guard's unshakable composure. "What poise! A true professional!" exclaimed a woman in a bright red coat, clapping her hands. "Absolutely incredible," replied a man standing next to her. "I would have lost my temper in his place." Nearby, two young men leaned against the railing, replaying a video on a phone. One of them excitedly pointed at the screen. "Look at him, not even a flinch. That's a real soldier right there." "Yeah, this is going viral for sure," his friend added with a grin. Title: Royal Guard puts rude tourist in his place. At least 1 million views. A little farther away, a boy no older than 5 clung to his mother's hand. His wide, awe-struck eyes were fixed on James. Hesitantly, he raised his tiny hand and gave the guard a shy wave. The gesture was simple, yet filled with admiration. Without breaking his composure, James subtly tilted his head in acknowledgement. It was a barely noticeable movement, but to the boy, it meant the world. He beamed, turning to his mother. "Mom, he waved back!" he exclaimed, his voice bursting with joy. His mother gently patted his shoulder and smiled. "You see, son? That's how you carry yourself with dignity." Someone in the crowd began to clap again, and soon applause rippled through the square. Cheers followed. "Well done, guard. That's professionalism. Keep it up." Several people snapped photos of James standing in his flawless stance, uploading them to social media with captions like, "British discipline in action," or "This is how you handle rude tourists." The buzz didn't die down. People compared Bob's unruly behavior to James's quiet strength. "That guard saved the day," remarked a woman with a camera. "Without him, this would have been a total embarrassment." "Exactly," added a man beside her. "He showed us what dignity looks like." Meanwhile, James remained perfectly still. For him, this was just another day on duty. He wasn't looking for applause or recognition. His role was to stand as a symbol of tradition, and he fulfilled that role flawlessly. As the crowd began to disperse, the square returned to its usual state. Tourists resumed taking photos, laughing and chatting. But the memory of what had just transpired lingered with everyone who had witnessed it. That evening, the incident went viral. Videos of the confrontation spread across social media, racking up millions of views. Comments poured in from around the world. "This guard is a legend, discipline and respect at its finest." "Impressive composure. That tourist could learn a thing or two about manners." Praise for James flooded every corner of the internet, while Bob's behavior became the subject of ridicule and criticism. James, however, saw none of it. After his shift ended, He removed his bearskin hat, carefully hung up his uniform, and straightened his posture. His gait showed a hint of fatigue, but his gaze remained focused. He had done his duty, with honor. As he passed through the barracks, he caught his reflection in a mirror. For a moment he paused, looking at himself. A quiet sense of pride settled in. This day had been a reminder that resilience, respect, and discipline could overcome even the most trying provocations.